made it to the end of the book. This is the final review of the 5-Minute Theory Workbook. Or you're watching this video and taking the test to see whether you have mastered all of the concepts that you've learned all the way through this book. So here's what I would do. Okay, I would stop the video, I would take the test and see how good you are, how much you know, and then use the video to check your answers or to figure out why you made a mistake. Okay, don't use the video as a crutch or use the video to cheat and get all the right answers. Okay, it really is a matter of taking the test and seeing where you messed up or what you don't know, and then going back and learning those things. Because as we said before, music theory and music as a whole is a foundation that builds from one step to the next step to the next step. So if there's something in here that you don't know, then it's not going to get easier as you progress on your instrument. Okay, so stop the video, do it, and then come back. And now, all right, test question number 1. Did you write your name? That's the top of the page. I'd take off 10 points if you didn't. All right, part number 1, we are drawing the enharmonic tone for the note given. And then we're writing the names under the note. Now remember what an enharmonic tone is? Okay, if you don't know what an enharmonic tone is, then you missed that whole lesson in the book. You have to go back and do that. Enharmonic tone is when the same key on the keyboard has 2 different note names. Okay, so for instance, this is a D flat, and I think the same note on a keyboard is a C sharp. All right, when it's a flat, it's basically, most of the time, the next letter name down sharp. So this A flat here, next letter name down is a G sharp. That's not always the case because of the accidentals or the naturals that you have that don't have an accidental in between. All right, this is an E flat. So my next letter down is a D sharp. Now it works opposite for the sharps. An F sharp, my next letter name up is a G flat. So F sharp and G flat are enharmonic tones. Now one tricky one at the end here, a B sharp. Now in your head, because I don't have one here, a keyboard, if you remember where B is, so C down a half step from B is, there's no accidental there. So this would not be a C flat or A flat, this would be a C. So B sharp is the enharmonic tone of C. E sharp is the enharmonic tone of F. F flat is the enharmonic tone of E. C flat is the enharmonic tone of B. So that is part number 1. Hopefully you got all of your enharmonic tones, especially that last one, which was a little tricky, but let's move on to part number 2. Now we're writing the interval under each pair of notes. So we don't have to name the notes, but you have to do it in your head to count up the scale for the interval. So F to G is a second. Now I can use my staff and I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or I can use my letter names. I can think of F, G, A, B, C, D. Okay, counting on my fingers like I like to do. All right, C to C. Okay, that is an eighth, but we call that an octave. All right, B to D is a third. D to C, okay, remember if it's the next letter name but the opposite, it is a seventh. Or you can count up D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So 7. All right, F down to E is a second. F down to G, again, same letter names that are right next to each other, but that far apart would be a seventh. A to A, it's the same note. We don't call it a 1, we call it a unison. D to A, D, C, B, A is a fourth. and then C to F. C, B, A, G, F is a fifth. Okay, how'd you do on naming your intervals? Hopefully pretty good, and we can move on. If you totally blew it and you got all of those wrong, then go back to the lesson that covers intervals. Part number 3, we're building a tetrachord using a starting pitch. So, do you remember what a tetrachord is? Tetrachord is 4 notes that have a pattern of whole step, half step. So I have to have the keyboard in my head, and I have to be able to start on a pitch and name those notes and draw those notes in here. So I'm writing, this is an F. So if I'm just going up a scale like this, if I write the note names in, F up a whole step, so this is a whole step to G, up another whole step to A, up a half step to B flat. Okay? So I can start on B flat and spell a tetrachord. B flat, up a whole step is C, up another whole step is D, up a half step is E flat. Cool. And number 18, starting on a D, up a whole to E. Now this is tricky. E up a whole is F. E to F is a half, so this has to be a sharp. So F sharp. And then a half step up from F sharp is G. So how did you do on your tetrachords? So if you totally blew your tetrachords and you don't know how to make that work with the whole steps and half steps, go back to the lesson and learn that, because if you can't do tetrachords, then you can't spell major scales. All right, part number 4, I'm just adding these note values together. And this is difficult because there's a lot of them. All right, so we kind of have to keep track of the values to find the answer. So I'm doing pluses and minuses here. So I'm just going to do this one step at a time. 1 minus 2 is -1, right? Plus 3 is 2, so I'm at 2. Plus another 1.5, right? That's 3.5. Minus a half is 3. Maybe can do this in your head. I don't know. It's pretty hard to do in your head. I like to use 0.5s instead of halves. Okay, adding and subtracting halves. It's easier for me to think of 0.5, but do it however it makes sense to you. All right, number 20. 4 minus 1 is 3. Plus 1/2 is 3.5, right? Plus 1.5 is what? 5 minus 4, that's a whole rest, is 1. So you really have to have your music math skills or your note value skills kind of happening, and being able to add and subtract note values, especially on the halves, becomes a little bit difficult. So if you did that correctly, let's move on to the second half of the final review. On part number 5, we're going to get pretty difficult here. So each pair of notes are a whole step apart. And we just did this in a previous lesson. We're making them a half step apart by adding an accidental to the second note. What makes this hard is that we're also using a key signature. So let's start off here with a B, E, and A, just to remind ourselves what the key signature notes are. Spell the notes. F to G is a whole step. How do I make that a half step? Okay, have to add a flat to the G. So don't change the first note, just change the second note. So this is C to D. D has to go down a half step, so this would become D flat. This is F. This note is E flat because of the key signature, correct? But F to E flat is a whole step. So I need to make that F, let me erase the, I need to make this E an E natural. So I have to use a natural sign to cancel the key signature. Okay, kind of tricky. B flat to A flat. This is kind of the same thing. B flat to A flat is a whole step. So I need to make the A a half step. So I have to erase the A and then draw in a natural sign. So B flat to A natural is a half step. So I had to use the key signature in addition to changing the second note. It gets really tricky on the next one because now I'm using F sharp and C sharp. Okay? Which is a key signature that you may or may not have played in a lot, okay? But it's all music theory. So if you know the concept, it's pretty easy. So A to B, I should just kind of get rid of my, my key signature notes. A to B, that's a whole step. How do I make my B a half step from A? I have to make it B flat. You can have flats as accidentals in a sharp key signature. Happens all the time. All right, this is an F, but key signature tells me it's an F sharp. This is an E. F sharp, if you think on your keyboard where that is, down a half step is F, down a half step is E. So I have to make the E into a half step, so I have to make this a sharp. That's very tricky. Okay? Between F sharp and E sharp is a half step. All right, tricky, tricky. B, and this is a C, but in the key signature, it's C sharp. So think on your keyboard, in your head, B to C. I'm really looking for a C natural, so I need to erase my sharp here, and then I need to write a natural sign. B to C natural is a half step. And my last one, thank goodness, E to D. Okay, how do I make D a half step from E? I have to add a sharp. All right, so that one is not only really, you have to understand the concepts of half steps and how you take a key signature note and change the note. It's really tricky, and I'm really trying to make you think hard. The more that you can use your mind as you're learning music, the better you're going to be at figuring things out, sight reading better. All right, part number 6. We're using the pattern of whole and half steps to construct major scales. First of all, do you remember the pattern? Okay, it's pretty simple. I'll write it down here for you, but you should have already done this. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. All right, so that's the pattern. Whole, whole, half, ho, 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 half. Okay, so now with our keyboard in our head, let's spell those notes. B flat up a whole, C up a whole, D up a half. Now I don't say D sharp, I have to use the next letter name, which would be E flat, up a whole, up a whole, up a whole, and then up a half, A to B flat. Now remember, you should end on the same note that you started with. Then on the staff, at the end of the line, I'm going to draw a bass clef. So you can't forget this part. And I'm using the accidentals to find the appropriate key signature. So in line number 25, I see a D flat, or a B flat, and an E flat. So I'm going to draw those in my key signature. I don't see an A flat, I don't see a D flat, anything else. Those are the two flat signs. So this is my key signature of the B flat major scale. On number 30, okay, I already have the whole and half steps listed here. G up a whole, A up a whole, B up a half, okay? Remember, there's no accidental between B and C. C up a whole, D up a whole, E up a whole. Now, think here, E, F, F sharp. Got to use my F sharp. And then up a half from F to G. I remember that my ending note is the same as my beginning note, so that's correct. What is the one accidental I have in this? Let me start off by drawing a bass clef. You can't just draw the accidental on the staff without knowing what clef you're in, because then it would be wrong. So then I draw my F sharp. So that is the key signature for the G major scale. All right, did you get all of that correct? All right, if you know how to construct a major scale and you know how to use those accidentals in the major scale to make your key signature, you got it. We have our very last thing here, which is constructing a chromatic scale by using half steps. Okay, so I just have to really know, either I have to know all of my, have to have my chromatic scale memorized on my instrument, or I have to know the keyboard well enough to know the note names. As I'm going up, I'm using sharps. As I'm going down, I'm using flats. So here we go. Let's compose this. C goes up to C sharp. Okay, C sharp goes up to D. D goes up to D sharp. D sharp goes up to E. Now here is a half step between E and F. F up a half step is F sharp. Remember, your sharp goes before the note, but after the letter name. F sharp up to G. G sharp. G sharp up to A up to A sharp. I'm running out of room here. Oops. A sharp. A sharp goes up to B, and then my top note is C. So that's my chromatic scale going up. I'm using sharp note names. Let's go back down. Now we're using flat note names. So C to B is a half step. Down a half step is B flat. Got to draw kind of small to fit all this in. B, oops, I did that wrong. Let me do that again. B flat down a half step is A, not A flat. Down another half step is A flat. Okay. Down another half step, G. Half step down, G flat. Half step down, F. Half step down is not F flat, although you could say F flat. It's really E. Okay, use the naturals. E, down a half step is E flat. Down a half step is D. Down a half step is D flat and C. So that is a chromatic scale going from C down to C. All right, that's probably the toughest thing you're going to do in this book is being able to spell those chromatic scales. If you are a piano player, it's pretty simple because you've been working on the keyboard. But if you haven't played piano and you're not a percussionist, learning how the half steps work and visualizing a keyboard in your head becomes really important as you're constructing your major scales or chromatic scales. Okay. Thank you for going all the way through this book, and hopefully you got all the way to the end, and hopefully you didn't use me just kind of as a crutch or a cheat to get all the right answers on this test, but you actually went all the way through and got all of those answers correct. If you missed anything, or if you had a whole section of this that you couldn't figure out, go back through whatever lesson it is and learn those music theory concepts, because every one of those will help you become a much better musician. So thank you so much for going through this entire series with me. I really congratulate you on everything you've learned in this book, 5-Minute Theory.